Healing from the past, a story of love, secrets, and rediscovery. They say time heals everything, but I don't believe that. I think time just teaches you how to hide things better. It blurs the edges, dulls the sting, forces you to smile through the H. But healing, that's a word invented by people who haven't had their hearts stepped on by someone who once swore they'd protect it. When I met Clara, I wasn't looking for anything. Not a friendship, not a fling, and certainly not love. I had already convinced myself that those stories were for other people. Those with lighter baggage, easier pasts, and hearts not already fractured. But Clara didn't ask permission to exist in my life. She just showed up, loud alive, the kind of person who made every other presence feel muted. We met at a dinner party I had no intention of attending, the kind of pretentious rooftop thing hosted by friends of friends, where everyone drinks too much overpriced wine and talks about careers they secretly hate. She was wearing mismatched earrings and a velvet green dress that looked like it came from a dream, or a thrift store, or both. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but her energy pulled you in like gravity. She didn't speak to me at first, just glanced my way across the table as someone poured red wine into her already full glass and spilled some onto the tablecloth. She smirked at me like the chaos amused her, and just like that, I was pulled under. We didn't talk that night. Not properly, just passing hellos and glances heavy with question marks. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, by sheer coincidence, or maybe not, that we met again in the nonfiction section of a dusty little bookstore that still smelled like moldy paper and forgotten dreams. She was holding a copy of Just Kids by Patti Smith. I made a stupid comment about how every woman I know who reads that book ends up chopping their hair off or getting a tattoo. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, but one from the gut, like she couldn't help herself. We talked for hours, standing between bookshelves, then walking through the city, her voice rising and falling like music, mine chasing to keep up. She told me about her ex who left in the middle of the night with half the apartment furniture. I told her about my mother who disappeared into a bottle and never came out. We were both messes, really. Maybe that's what made it feel safe. Two broken people who didn't expect the other to be whole. I started seeing her everywhere after that. Not in a stalker kind of way, but in a life is clearly trying to tell me something way. She'd show up at gallery openings, cafes, the park bench where I liked to read. Eventually, it stopped feeling coincidental and just felt inevitable. And then one day it was official. We were a thing. A couple. Boyfriend and girlfriend. Although Clara never liked labels, she'd always joke that we were just two comets hurtling through space, colliding now and then. I didn't mind. As long as we were colliding, I didn't care what we were called. The first few months were magic. You know, the kind of magic you only get at the start, before you really know someone, before the shadows show up. We spent entire weekends in bed, eating takeout and reading poetry aloud. We danced in the kitchen with no music. She made me playlists and wore my hoodies and left love notes in my coat pockets. I started believing in things I hadn't in years. Like softness, like forever. But magic always runs out. Or maybe people just stop believing in it when real life starts to press in. The first crack showed when I got a new job that took more of my time. She said she was happy for me, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She'd wait up for me with take-up boxes on her lap and stories about her day, but I'd be too tired to listen properly. I'd nod, distracted, already thinking about the next meeting, the next deadline. She needed presence, and I gave her absence wrapped in apologies. Then came the fights. They weren't dramatic or loud. Clara wasn't that kind of person, but they were cutting, subtle, a coldness in her voice, refusal to meet my gaze. Silence that lasted just a bit too long. She'd say things like, "It's fine," when it clearly wasn't. I, stupidly, took her at her word. I thought we'd bounce back. We always had before. So when she suggested a little break, I didn't panic. I agreed, thinking space would be good. I even called it brave. I didn't understand what she meant by break. I thought it was a pause, a comma. She meant a full stop. 2 months passed. I didn't hear from her. I didn't reach out either. Pride is a strange thing. It makes you do the opposite of what you feel. I filled the silence with work, late nights, and hollow laughter. Then, one Thursday morning, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name written in her unmistakable handwriting. Inside was an invitation. A wedding. Clara's wedding. To someone named Ben. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, reading and rereading the cursive letters as if they would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. She was getting married. To someone else? A man I had never heard her mention. The date was in 6 weeks. The venue was a coastal vineyard upstate. There was a photo attached. Clara and Ben, barefoot on the beach, smiling like they'd been doing it forever. Her eyes looked different. Quieter. Older, maybe. Or just resolved. I don't know why she sent it. Maybe it was her way of saying goodbye. Or maybe it was a test. A dare. To see if I'd show up. I spent the next few weeks trying to erase her from my bloodstream, failing miserably. I told my friends, who gasped and offered klitches. You deserve better. She moved on fast. She's not worth it. But they didn't know her. Not really. They didn't know how she used to hum when she watered plants, or how she once cried at a sunset because it was too beautiful to handle. I RSVP'd yes. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd flinch when she saw me. Maybe I just wanted proof that she really had let go. I rented a suit, booked a room nearby, and drove up the morning of the wedding with my heart doing somersaults in my chest. The venue was beautiful. Too beautiful. White drapes swayed in the breeze. Rows of wooden chairs faced a cliffside where the ceremony would be held. Clara's taste, through and through. I saw her from a distance before she saw me. Her hair was longer now, swept up elegantly, a tiny flower tucked behind her ear. She looked like someone I used to know in another lifetime. When our eyes met, time stopped. For a second, I saw her flinch, barely, but it was there. And then she smiled. Not the old Clara smile, but a new one, polite, guarded. We exchanged pleasantries. She introduced me to Ben, who was handsome in a generic kind of way. He shook my hand firmly and said, "I've heard a lot about you." I couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a warning. I stayed through the ceremony, through the speeches and the dancing, through every second that felt like a dagger pressed gently against my ribs. And then I left. Quietly. No goodbyes, no final words, just slipped out into the night, the sound of laughter echoing behind me like a life I once tried to build. I don't know what I expected. A scene, a confession, for her to run after me in her dress, saying it was all a mistake. None of that happened. The world doesn't give you neat endings. It gives you invitations to weddings you weren't supposed to be part of. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you the strength to walk away from the altar, even when you're not the one saying, "I do." The drive home from the wedding was a blur. I don't even remember how long it took, what music played, or which highway I took. It was like my body drove itself while my mind stayed back there, standing on that cliffside, watching her say vows I thought would one day be mine. I don't know what was worse, that she looked happy or that I still wanted her to be. I got home just before midnight. The apartment was cold, dimly lit by a hallway bulb I never got around to changing. Everything looked the same, untouched by what I had just witnessed. But I wasn't the same. Something in me had quietly snapped, the way a thread finally gives after holding too long under pressure. The air felt heavier, the silence meaner. I dropped the suit jacket on the floor and sat in the dark, surrounded by the remnants of a life she had once been part of. Her books still lined the shelf, her mug still in the cupboard, and a pair of her socks I never returned sat balled up in the laundry drawer. It's strange how the smallest things feel the loudest after someone leaves. I didn't sleep that night. I scrolled through old photos of us, reliving moments frame by frame, torturing myself with what used to be. We were smiling in every shot, arms tangled, eyes bright, laughter caught in mid-motion, We looked like a story that hadn't finished yet, but it had. And I was the only one still flipping the pages, hoping for a different ending. The next morning, I threw away the invitation. Not dramatically, not with tears. Just folded it neatly and placed it in the trash. Then I stood there for a full 5 minutes, debating whether to take it back out. I didn't. That was the first act of real strength I'd managed in months. In the days that followed, life returned with its usual demands. Work, emails, groceries, traffic. All the mundane rituals that pretend to be important. I went through the motions like a ghost wearing my face. Friends checked in. They tried to make plans, offered distractions, proposed nights out. I declined most of them. Not because I didn't want to heal, but because I didn't yet know who I was without her shadow beside me. But one afternoon, almost 2 weeks after the wedding, I found myself standing outside the bookstore where we first really spoke. I hadn't planned to go there. I was walking without purpose, feet wandering where the heart hadn't dared to. And yet there I was, staring at the dusty glass door like it held some sort of answer. I went inside. Everything was the same. Same old man behind the counter. Same creaky floorboards. Same scent of musty pages and stories waiting to be heard. I walked past the nonfiction section, fingers brushing against spines like they might whisper something back. Then I saw it. Patti Smith's Just Kids, the same edition Clara had been holding that day. I picked it up, turned to a random page, and read aloud a line about holding someone even after they're gone. I bought the book. Not because I needed it, but because it was a piece of the beginning, and I was trying to find a way to rewrite the ending. Back home, I made tea in the mug she left behind. I sipped it slowly, flipped through the book, and allowed myself, for the first time, to grieve properly. Not just the loss of her, but the loss of who I had been with her. That version of me no longer existed. He was folded into the past, tucked between memories and mistakes. I didn't cry. I had done enough of that already. What I felt was something heavier. Acceptance. The quiet, bitter kind that doesn't feel like relief, but still clears space for breathing. Over the next month, I started doing small things to reclaim my life. I moved the furniture around, painted one of the walls, and gave away the records we used to dance to. It wasn't a purge. It was a gentle letting go. I stopped stalking her Instagram, stopped reading old texts. I even stopped mentioning her name in conversations, as if saying it kept her tethered to my thoughts. Healing, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or dramatic monologues. It arrives in whispers. In the moment you delete a photo without flinching, in the hour you forget to think about them, in the laugh that surprises you because it feels genuine. One Friday night, I went to a gallery opening alone. It wasn't my usual scene, but something about the invite intrigued me. Maybe I was craving beauty. Maybe I just didn't want to be home with my thoughts. The space was small, filled with abstract pieces and strangers sipping cheap wine. I wandered aimlessly, half interested, until I stumbled upon a painting that stopped me cold. It was a stormy seascape, moody, violent, alive. The waves crashed against invisible rocks, sky torn open in streaks of purple and black. It was chaos, but it felt honest. I stood there longer than I should have, staring into the canvas like it held my reflection. And then I heard a voice beside me. Looks like someone's been through a storm. It wasn't Clara. It wasn't anyone I knew. Just a stranger, a woman with short curly hair and eyes that didn't pretend. She introduced herself as May. We talked about the painting, then about art in general, then about nothing and everything. She wasn't trying to impress me. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was just there, real, present. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't comparing her to Clara. I wasn't measuring her voice or her smile against a ghost. I was just talking, breathing, living. We exchanged numbers. I didn't overthink it. I didn't romanticize it. I just let it happen. Slowly, gently, without pressure. May and I met for coffee a week later. Then a walk through the park. Then a movie that neither of us really liked, but we laughed about it anyway. There was no spark, not the wild, lightning kind I had with Clara. But there was something else, warmth, steadiness, a sense that I didn't have to earn her presence. It was different, and different didn't mean worse. Over time, May became a part of my routine. Not in a dramatic, sweeping way, but in small, meaningful ways. She remembered my coffee order. She asked questions and actually listened. She didn't fill silence with noise. She let things be. I found myself smiling more, checking my phone not out of desperation but curiosity. I started writing again. Short essays, journal entries, thoughts I hadn't dared to put into words since Clara left. May never asked about my past, and I never felt the need to bring it up. But one evening, as we watched the sunset from her apartment balcony, I told her everything. Not for pity, not for validation, just to let it out. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer advice. She just held my hand. That was all I needed. One night, I received an email from Clara. No subject line. Just a few sentences. I hope you're well. I wanted you to know that I didn't send the invitation to hurt you. I thought it would bring closure. Maybe that was selfish. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I hope you're finding peace. I stared at it for a long time. I could have replied. I could have said 1,000 things. But I didn't. Some doors don't need to be reopened. Some wounds don't need to be poked again. I archived the email. Not deleted. Just put away. Like a memory you choose not to live in anymore. As seasons changed, so did I. There were still days when her name echoed in my mind like a song I hadn't fully forgotten. But they came less often and with less weight. I wasn't trying to erase her anymore, just trying to live beyond her. And that was enough. One morning, I found that mug, the one Clara had left behind, still in the cupboard. I took it out, stared at it, then quietly placed it in a donation box. I didn't need it anymore. I had my own mug now. One May had given me, with a dumb joke printed on it and a tiny chip in the handle. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and maybe that was the point. We spend so much time chasing the perfect story, the one with fireworks and fate and cinematic endings. But sometimes, the best stories are the quiet ones. The ones where healing doesn't look like falling in love again, but simply remembering how to stand on your own. And when someone walks in, not to save you, but to walk beside you, you realize that's all you ever needed. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe May and I will write our own messy, beautiful chapter. Maybe we won't. But for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with not knowing. Because life isn't about holding on to the person who left. It's about learning to hold yourself until someone comes along who doesn't ask you to let go of who you were, but helps you grow into who you're becoming. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing actually looks like. It had been 6 months since Clara's wedding, and the I would last forever had finally begun to dull into something quieter, something that no longer screamed in the back of my mind. I wouldn't call it peace, not exactly. It was more like learning to the limit after a deep wound. A slow acceptance that some parts of you will always walk differently. May had become a constant, and yet not an overwhelming one. We were like two people quietly rebuilding our own corners of life, occasionally meeting in the middle to share the progress. She didn't demand explanations, didn't expect grand romantic declarations. She offered space, and in that space, I found a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. One morning, we were sitting on a bench near the river, watching geese waddle through wet grass, our coffees steaming in our hands. May turned to me and asked, "Do you think we ever really move on from our first great heartbreak?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. The silence between us had become a language of its own. I think she already knew what I would have said, that it's not about moving on, but moving differently. The wounds don't vanish. We just build lives around them that are strong enough to hold their weight. We kissed then, a quiet kiss, not born of passion but of understanding. I didn't feel sparks or the shiver of adrenaline I once did with Clara. I felt grounding. I felt present. But with each step into this new chapter, Clara's memory receded like a tide, not completely gone, never that, but no longer crashing, just ripples. Then, unexpectedly, she showed up again. Not in person, not directly. But her presence returned in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those awkward reunions where people you haven't seen in years drink overpriced cocktails and pretend their lives turned out as planned. Someone mentioned Clara, not deliberately. Her name floated through the air like smoke. "Clara's back in the city," someone said. "She and Ben split." I didn't react. Or at least, I tried not to. I felt May's hand gently squeeze mine under the table. She'd heard it too. That night, I told May everything. Every thought I hadn't spoken aloud. The way Clara had carved herself so deeply into my sense of self that I couldn't tell where I ended and she began. The guilt, the longing, the way I still sometimes dreamed about her and woke up with tears I didn't understand. May didn't flinch. She didn't accuse me of emotional infidelity or ask if I still loved Clara. She just said, "I know." And somehow, those two words meant more than any reassurance. But knowing Clara was back changed something. Not in a way I wanted, but in a way I couldn't avoid. I caught myself walking by the old bookstore again, wondering if I'd see her there. I checked the cafe where she used to write for hours. I even scrolled through Instagram. Though her account was now private, I told myself it was curiosity, closure, a need to prove that her return didn't matter. But the truth was messier. I hadn't seen her in almost a year, and yet the possibility of a chance encounter haunted every street corner. Then, one afternoon, it happened. I was picking up lunch from a small deli downtown when I saw her standing across the street, holding a canvas tote bag and looking up at a building. My heart punched my ribs. She looked almost exactly the same, only thinner, more fragile around the edges. Her hair was down, and she was wearing that same worn denim jacket she used to steal from my closet. I didn't call out. I just watched her. She turned slowly as if she felt someone staring, and then our eyes met. No smile, no nod, just a flicker of recognition, followed by an immediate turning away. She walked on. I didn't follow, but the aftershock followed me. I told May that night, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. She sat quietly, listening as I replayed the 5-second encounter like it was a feature-length film. Then she asked something I hadn't prepared for. Would you meet her if she reached out? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. What do you do when the past reappears not as a ghost, but as flesh and breath and eyes that still know every version of you? What do you do when your heart doesn't leap but sinks instead, unsure of which direction safety lies? A week later, Clara did reach out. This time, it wasn't an invitation or an email. It was a message. Simple, cautious. I saw you. Across the street. Would you want to meet for coffee? I stared at the screen for a long time. May was in the other room, humming as she watered her plants, unaware of the storm reforming in my chest. I didn't hide the message. I walked in, showed her, and said, I want to say no, but I think I need to say yes. She nodded. Just nodded. Send go, if that's what you need. No jealousy. No fear. Just trust. The kind I didn't know people were still capable of. I met Clara 2 days later at a small cafe tucked in a side street. The kind of place where no one looked up from their laptops and the espresso machine hissed constantly. She was already seated when I arrived, staring out the window, fingers wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. When she looked up, there was something unreadable in her expression. Not sorrow, not guilt, just exhaustion. She smiled faintly. I nodded, sitting down opposite her. The silence stretched. I didn't know what I expected. An apology? A confession? Instead, she said, I wasn't going to message you, but seeing you there. It reminded me of what I ruined. I didn't interrupt. Ben and I ended things 2 months ago. It was never what I made it look like. We were never right, but I rushed into it because I was scared. I watched her as she spoke. Her hands trembled slightly. Her voice wavered, but her eyes remained steady. I thought I'd find peace in someone else, but all I found was silence. I tried to build something with him out of fear, not love. She looked at me then, truly looked. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to tell you that. I could have said 1,000 things. Could have asked why she invited me to her wedding if she wasn't sure. Could have told her about the nights I stayed up wondering what I'd done wrong. But I didn't. I simply said, "Thank you." And for the first time since we'd sat down, her eyes softened. "You seem different," she said. "I am. You look happy?" "I am." She smiled with tears. "I'm glad." We parted with a quiet hug, no promises, no lingering touches. Just two people acknowledging what once was and accepting what now is. I walked home lighter, not healed, because healing is never a single moment, but more whole. May was reading on the couch when I returned. She looked up, saw something in my face, and simply asked, "How was it?" I sat beside her, pulled her close, and whispered, "It was the last page of a chapter I didn't realize I was still holding open." She kissed my forehead. "So what's the next chapter?" I smiled into her shoulder. "One I finally get to write for myself." And for the first time in over a year, I believed it. Completely. Weeks passed after that final meeting with Clara, and each one seemed to peel away another invisible layer of my former self. It wasn't dramatic, like shedding skin, but slow and subtle, like the way morning light creeps through closed blinds. I wasn't just moving on anymore. I was transforming. The version of me that had been so tightly wound around the idea of Clara, of us, of what we could have been, was finally unraveling, and underneath it all was someone quieter, someone lighter, someone ready to live without constantly measuring every moment against the past. May became the heartbeat of my days. Not because she overwhelmed me or consumed every corner of my life, but because she respected the spaces I needed and quietly inhabited the ones I offered. She wasn't trying to replace anyone or anything. She wasn't a bomb or a distraction. She was May. Honest, flawed, real. We didn't talk about Clara much after that day, and when we did, it wasn't out of necessity but clarity. Like old weather reports you look back on to understand a storm you once survived. She listened, never judged, never feared my honesty. And in doing so, she gave me the rarest gift, the freedom to be unfinished. That winter was unusually long. Snow clung to the city like it had nowhere better to be. The streets turned to ice, and people shuffled with their heads down, muffled in layers, hoping for early spring. May loved the snow, I didn't. But I started to love the way she experienced it. She dragged me outside to watch flakes fall under lamplight, insisting it looked like magic if you tilted your head just right. We'd leave footprints in fresh white blankets in the park, then run back inside laughing, noses red, fingers numb. She had this gift for turning the mundane into a memory. One night, after a dinner that turned into 2 bottles of wine and a long, meandering conversation about what scares us most, she asked me something simple but disarming. "What do you believe in now?" I didn't answer right away. Belief had become a fragile thing for me, something I'd once placed in people and promises and lost both. But I looked at her, sitting cross-legged in an oversized sweater, her eyes steady on mine, and I realized the answer wasn't as elusive as I thought. "I believe in beginning again," I said. "Even if the pieces don't fit the same." She smiled. Not as someone who needed more, but as someone who understood exactly what that meant. We didn't talk about the future. Not in a heavy way. We didn't outline goals or make sweeping declarations. Instead, we lived it as it came. Week by week, smile by smile, late-night takeaway dinners and lazy Sunday mornings. And that felt like enough. But life, as it always does, doesn't like clean lines. It has a way of twisting, reshaping the path when you finally think you found stable ground. It came as a letter, an actual letter, in an envelope. No return address again. Inside was a folded piece of thick paper with neat handwriting I didn't recognize. It wasn't Clara's, not May's. Just a single paragraph, unsigned, "You don't know me, but I thought you should know." The story Clara told you about why she married Ben. Why she left the way she did. It wasn't the whole truth. There are things she kept from you. Things she's still hiding. If you want answers, ask her what really happened in Lisbon. Lisbon. I read the name over and over, like it was some ancient code I was supposed to crack. We'd never been to Lisbon together. She never talked about Lisbon. It was just a city, a dot on the map, until that moment when it suddenly felt like the epicenter of something I hadn't seen coming. I didn't tell May. Not right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know what it meant. Was it a lie? A prank? A cruel joke from someone who knew just enough to stir the pot? But it burrowed into my brain, a single thread pulling at the seams. What had happened in Lisbon? And why did it feel like the missing piece of a puzzle I'd convinced myself I'd already completed? I tried to ignore it, for days, but the more I tried, the louder it echoed. Finally, I called Clara. I hadn't planned what to say, only that I needed to say something. She answered, her voice cautious. "I got a letter?" I said. "Someone told me to ask you about Lisbon." There was silence on the line, a long, heavy pause. Then she whispered, "I was hoping you'd never know." That was all it took to change everything. She agreed to meet, not at the cafe. Not at a place filled with noise or familiarity. She chose the old bridge, the one that overlooked the abandoned railway, where teenagers tagged rusted cars and couples went when they didn't want to be seen. It was a strange place for truth, but maybe that's why it made sense. She was already there when I arrived, wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold, arms crossed, eyes tired. "I'm not proud of what I'm about to tell you," she began. "But I won't lie." I nodded. Before Ben, before the wedding, before everything fell apart, there was a trip. I went to Lisbon alone. I told people it was to clear my head, but really I went to meet someone. Someone I met online. Stupid, I know. We'd been talking for months. He was an artist. Said all the right things. I thought I was escaping from the pressure of us, of the life we were building too fast. I thought I needed to know if there was something better. But it wasn't better. It was worse. He was married, lied about everything. It ended before it even began. I came home ashamed, humiliated, and instead of facing you, I pulled away. I created distance. I made you the reason. And when Ben came along, I didn't love him, but he made me feel clean again. Like I hadn't messed up. Like I could start over without telling the truth. I didn't speak. I didn't know how to. She took a deep breath. The letter wasn't wrong, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Lisbon wasn't just about betrayal. It was about fear. I ruined something before I even knew how to fix it, and I thought hiding it would protect you. From what? I finally asked. From the version of me that you wouldn't love anymore. I let her words settle, then said softly, "But you didn't give me the choice." She nodded, eyes glossy. "I know." We stood in silence, the wind cutting through our coats, both of us older now, too aware of the weight of choices. "I don't hate you," I said. "I know," she whispered. "What? That's what hurts most." Though we didn't hug, didn't say goodbye. We just parted, each walking away in opposite directions, like characters who'd reached the final page. Back home, I sat beside May, handed her the letter, and told her everything. Every word Clara said, every thought I had. She read it, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. "Do you still love her?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I don't want to." She nodded slowly, then reached for my hand. "Then, let's start from there." And just like that, we did. Not by erasing what came before, but by building something new brick by brick on a foundation of truth, however shaky. Because love isn't about never looking back. It's about choosing. Every day to face forward, even when the past tries to pull you sideways. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit you don't have all the answers and keep going anyway. But even then, I couldn't shake one question. Who sent the letter? And why now? Because as much as I wanted to believe everything was behind me, life had just cracked open a door I hadn't realized was still ajar. And something was waiting on the other side. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was tormented by memories of Clara or doubts about May, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the letter. The words had wormed their way into me like a splinter under the skin, small, hidden, but impossible to ignore. Who sent it? Why now? And how did they know about Lisbon when even I hadn't? It was too precise, too targeted. Someone had been watching or listening, or digging through the pieces of a life I had spent months carefully rebuilding. But for what purpose? The anonymity of the letter gave it power. Without a face to confront, I was left shadowboxing ghosts, questioning everything I thought I'd buried. Over breakfast the next morning, I told May I wanted to find out who had sent it. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She only asked, "Will it give you peace, or just more questions?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. I started where any rational person starts. I asked myself who had something to gain from steering old waters. The list was short. Clara, perhaps. But what she'd confessed on the bridge had felt raw and calculated. She had no reason to reopen that wound. Ben? Maybe. But what would he gain by dragging me back into her past? We'd never even spoken beyond pleasantries. Mutual friends. Possible. One of them might have known about Lisbon, known how it fractured things silently beneath the surface. But again, what would be the motive? I reached out to an old acquaintance from that time, Jordan, someone who had always been closer to Clara than to me, but who had floated through both our lives like a common thread. I sent a simple message. "Did you ever hear Clara mention anything about Lisbon back then?" The reply came within minutes. "We don't talk much anymore, but yeah, I remember she left suddenly." Didn't say where. When she got back, she looked wrecked. I assumed it was about you. Why? I stared at the screen. So someone else knew. It wasn't a secret she'd kept completely locked away. The letter had a source. I responded carefully. I got a note. Anonymous. Told me to ask her about it? Another pause. Then that's weird. You sure it wasn't her trying to confess something she couldn't say out loud? No. I wrote. It wasn't her handwriting. Then I have no clue. But look, she wasn't the only one in pain. Just remember that. Pain. That word kept returning, looping itself around my thoughts. I'd been so consumed by my own hurt that I hadn't stopped to consider the collateral damage. How many other people had been quietly impacted by our unraveling? Later that day, I walked to the old building where Clara used to live. I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street, staring up at the window that used to glow with yellow light late into the night. The balcony where she hung fairy lights. The spot where I once stood in the rain after a fight, too proud to knock, too desperate to leave. That place had seen versions of us no one else had. And then I noticed something. A woman in the apartment next door, watering plants on the windowsill. She looked familiar. I squinted, tried to place her. And then it hit me. She had been Clara's neighbor. They spoke sometimes, shared glances and greetings. She would have seen everything, every argument, every goodbye, every return. I crossed the street without thinking, rang the bell. She opened the door a crack, cautious. "Hi, sorry to bother you," I said. "You used to live next to Clara, right?" Her eyes narrowed. "Still do, ba." I was close to her. We used to date. As she opened the door a little wider, studying my face. I remember. I hesitated. "Did you ever see anything?" Around the time she went to Lisbon. That caught her attention. "You mean when she left in the middle of the night?" My heart stuttered. "Middle of the night?" She nodded. She had a suitcase. Cab pulled up around 3 a.m. I asked where she was going. She said it was for clarity. That she'd made a mistake. My voice was barely above a whisper. "Did anyone visit her before that?" She paused. "Yes, a guy. I didn't see his face clearly. He didn't come in. They talked outside. It got loud, then quiet. She went inside alone. An hour later, she was gone. Do you know who he was?" She shook her head. "No, but I remember him. He had a limp, right leg. It wasn't much, but it was something. A man with a limp. An argument. A sudden trip. A letter written by someone who knew things they shouldn't. The threads were still frayed, but now they were pulling tighter. Back at home, I sat with May and told her everything. She didn't flinch. "Do you think it was the man she went to see?" "Maybe," I said. "But then, why contact me?" May leaned back. Maybe it wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe someone else entirely. Someone who saw it unfold and wanted the truth to come out. I didn't sleep again. I kept replaying the neighbor's words. A man? A limp? Then I remembered someone, a name that had flickered in and out of our conversations back then. Nathan, a friend Clara met at a photography class. She mentioned he had been injured in an accident years ago, limped ever since. I had brushed it off. He was just a friend. I searched online, found his portfolio, a public email. I wrote a message that night. Polite, vague, careful. I said I had a few questions about the past, didn't expect a reply. But one came. 2 days later. I was wondering when you'd reach out. Meet me at 10th and Bleecker. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. No explanation, just instructions. May didn't ask if I was going. She knew. I showed up early. The street was quiet, the city slipping into dusk. And then I saw him. Same face, older now. A cane instead of a limp. He looked right at me and smiled like we were old friends. "You've got questions," he said, not offering a handshake. I nodded. "I want to know what really happened." He looked up at the sky. "Clara and I had something brief. Messy. She was unraveling. So was I. We met at a gallery, spoke for hours. She told me things she hadn't told anyone. About how she felt trapped. Afraid not of you, but of herself. Of being loved fully. She didn't think she deserved it." My throat tightened. "She came to Lisbon because I told her it would give her clarity. But I lied. I wanted her there for me. And when she arrived, I told her I was married. That I wasn't leaving my wife. I broke her. And she left. Bah. So why the letter?" I asked, voice sharp. He met my eyes. "Because I kept thinking about what she said. How you were the only thing that ever felt safe. And I realized she had never told you why she left. That she let you believe you failed. I thought you deserved to know it wasn't your fault." I exhaled. A long, bitter breath. He continued. "But I also knew she wouldn't tell you." "Not really. Not until she had to." Silence stretched between us. "You loved her?" I asked. "I wanted to," he said. "But I didn't know how. And by the time I learned, it was too late." I nodded, not out of agreement, but understanding. As I walked away, the city buzzed around me, but inside everything was still. Back at May's, I stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. He told me the truth. It wasn't about me. It was about what she couldn't face in herself. May pulled me close. "I'm glad you know," I whispered. "So why doesn't it make me feel better?" "Because pain doesn't care about facts," she said. "It cares about what it lived through." And we sat in silence, together, warm, present, and for the first time I didn't need closure. I needed this moment, this person, this breath. But something still lingered. Not from Clara. Not from Nathan. Something I hadn't yet seen coming. Because just as I thought the past had offered its final twist, a message appeared on my phone, from a number I didn't recognize. It simply said, "You've got it all wrong. Meet me tomorrow. Same place. Same time." And beneath it, a name I hadn't heard in over a decade. My brother. The name on my screen stopped the world from spinning. I hadn't seen it, spoken it, or even allowed myself to think about it for nearly 10 years. My brother. Daniel. A ghost who had vanished from my life without warning, like someone switching off a light mid-sentence. We'd been close once, inseparable in the way only siblings shaped by the same storm can be. But after our father died and the inheritance split lit our grief into flame, he disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. And now, after all this time, everything with Clara and the letter in Lisbon, he resurfaces with 5 words and a dare, "You've got it all wrong." I didn't tell May. Not yet. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't know what I was walking into. The idea that my estranged brother was somehow involved in this twisted tangle of Clara's past made no sense. And yet, deep down, something about the timing, the cryptic tone of the letter, the precision of what was revealed, it suddenly didn't feel so random anymore. The next evening, I went to 10th and Bleecker, heart pounding, lungs tightening with every step. It was dusk again, as if the city had chosen to replay the scene but change the cast. I leaned against the brick wall outside a shuttered bookstore and waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then he appeared. Same posture, same walk, though a little stiffer now. He looked older, thinner, as if life had spent a decade slowly carving him down to bone. But the face was unmistakable. Daniel? We stood a few feet apart, staring. Neither of us moved. Finally, he spoke. Didn't think you'd show. I shouldn't have, I said, voice dry. But here I am, he nodded slowly, almost solemnly. You want answers, I owe you that, but I folded my arms. Start talking. Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding the story in for years. I met Clara before you did, briefly. A year earlier, at a friend's party. We talked, nothing serious. But I remembered her, and when I found out you two were dating, I recognized the name. I didn't say anything. Figured it didn't matter. I didn't speak. Just stared, heart racing. But later, he continued, after you two got serious, I started seeing changes in you. You were obsessed. Not in love, obsessed. She became your gravity, your mirror. And I watched you disappear into her. But my jaw clenched. What does this have to do with you vanishing? Everything, he said quietly. You don't know what happened the night I left, do you? I shook my head. You took your share of the inheritance and disappeared. That's all I know. No, he said, eyes suddenly flaring. I gave my share to Mom and walked away. I didn't take a damn thing. I found out she was sick and told you. You said you'd come home. You didn't, because Clara needed you more. That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep being the backup brother. Always the one left behind. The words struck like a slap. I tried to defend myself, but nothing came out. Daniel continued. I left because I had to protect myself from watching you throw yourself away. And I watched you do it again when she left you. You shattered, so I waited. I watched. And when I found out about Lisbon, I had to say something. I stared at him, realization blooming like a bruise. You sent the letter. But he nodded once. Yes? You pretended to be someone else? I had to, he said. You wouldn't listen if it came from me. You'd dismiss it, just like you dismissed me. I took a step back. The ground didn't feel stable anymore. What now? I asked. Why get involved in this again after all this time? His voice dropped. Because I saw the patterns repeating. You meet someone new. You build your whole identity around them. You ignore your needs, your past, your own pain. I wanted to stop the cycle before you lost yourself again. I was shaking. With anger, with disbelief. With the weight of 1,000 conversations we never had. I'm not the same person anymore, I said through clenched teeth. And you don't get to walk back into my life and act like my guardian. I'm not trying to save you, he said. I just needed you to see that you're worth more than the women you keep choosing to bleed for. I turned away. My eyes stung. Daniel's voice softened behind me. But you can hate me if you want. But you needed to hear the truth. I didn't reply. I just walked. Fast, without looking back. The city spun around me in blurry motion, headlights streaking like stars, wind clawing at my coat. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't go home yet. Not to May. Not until I could make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I found myself at the river. Same bench May and I had sat on months ago, watching geese and talking about belief. I sat there now alone, every part of me unraveling again. My brother had watched me fall and chosen distance instead of help. And now, he claimed his exile was my fault. The truth he gave me didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a knife. But in that storm of emotion, another realization surfaced. He was right. Not about everything. Not about disappearing, but about the way I had lived. I had made Clara my axis, let her define the rhythm of my days, my worth, my sense of home. And even with May, I had been careful, cautious, always measuring, the fearing another collapse. I hadn't been loving, I had been surviving. The next morning, I told May everything. Every word Daniel said, every feeling it unearthed. I expected her to be angry, maybe even feel betrayed that I hadn't told her about the message sooner. But instead, she just reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't want to be another mirror for you," she said. "I want to be real. With you. As we are. Not as we were. Not as we're supposed to be." I squeezed her hand. "I don't know who I am without someone to orbit. But then let's find out," she said. In the following weeks, things shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. I went back to therapy for the first time in years, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand how I had kept building my identity from broken blueprints. I started writing again, not to impress anyone, not to publish, but just for me thoughts. Feelings. Fragments. May encouraged it. Never hovered. Just supported. Daniel didn't reach out again, and I didn't contact him. Not yet. But I kept his number, stored under a name I once buried. Blood. One night, May and I were lying in bed, her head on my chest, when she whispered, "Do you think people can really change?" I thought of Clara, about Daniel, about myself. I think people don't change, but they choose differently. And that's enough. She kissed my collarbone. Then keep choosing. The seasons turned again. Spring arrived slowly, like someone testing the water before jumping in. I stood one morning by the window, coffee in hand, sunlight stretching across the floor. May was in the kitchen humming, frying something in butter. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. I felt like me. Not defined by Clara. Not running from Daniel. Not clinging to hurt like it made me interesting. Just a man who had learned, through fire, through silence, through letters in Lisbon, that love is not meant to consume you. It's meant to hold you. And sometimes, the most profound relationship you'll ever have is the one you rebuild with yourself. I didn't respond to Daniel's message. Not yet. But I wrote one of my own. A letter. Not to send, just to release. I wrote it to Clara. "Thank you for loving me the way you knew how, and for leaving when you did. Because losing you taught me how to finally find myself." I folded it, placed it in the drawer, closed it, and with that the story ended. Not with a twist, but with a choice to begin again. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.